and I'll throw them up on the screen. We're now live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Vedic Inquirer. I'm delighted to be joined by Yogesvara Prabhu. He was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1970 in London, where he was part of the team recording the Radha Krishna Temple album, received brahminical initiation in 1972, and with 13 years of temple life, traveled with Srila Prabhupada across Europe as his French language translator, served as the TP in Paris and later Philadelphia, director of ISKCON's French publishing office, editor of Back to Godhead magazine, founder of Bala Books, and currently serves as a mediator for ISKCON Resolve. Yogesvara Prabhu earned his master's degree in religious studies at Hofstra University, where he taught Holocaust studies and Hinduism from 2003 to 2013. His devotional writings include Here Comes the Sun, The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison, Gita Wisdom, An Introduction to India's Essential Yoga Text, and Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to the West, an ISKCON authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada. He's also a documentary filmmaker whose films about the Holocaust history are seen on PBS and Discovery. His biographies of Holocaust survivors have sold more than 1.5 million copies worldwide. Yogesvara Prabhu recently compiled an ethical framework, which has been ratified by the GBC, and this will be the basis of the interview. So welcome. That's quite a CV that you've got there, Prabhuji. I wonder if you could tell us.
I couldn't make a living at any of it, so let that be forewarning for everybody. Pick something and stick to it.
I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more just about yourself and your relationship, particularly with ethics. So, what is this ethics? Why do we need an ethical code for our society?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. It's something that's very dear to my heart. It took several years to put it all together and a lot of negotiating to finally get it ratified and voted into law by the GBC. Ethics was drummed into me from an early age. I graduated from the Ethical Culture Society here in New York, where I went for 6 years of my pre-college education. Many of my friends are involved with ethics, either as professors or as ethics compliance officers for major corporations. And from the beginning of my own life as a devotee back in 1969, it was ethics and occasionally the lack thereof that guided me in decisions about how long to stay as an active devotee in the ISKCON institution, what to do with my life after coming out of temple life, where I was for 13 years. So it's something quite important to me. Your question as to why we need a code of ethical behavior, do you really want me to answer that question?
Yeah, please. I know it might sound really basic, and obviously the society existed for 50 years, many of which it didn't have an ethical code.
Right.
And I think potentially devotees have an interesting relationship with ethics. You know, we were talking yesterday with Garuda Prabhu about morality. I do note that you make a distinction between the two, but sometimes we seem to subscribe to a sort of transcendental morality or a transcendental ethics. Lying for Krishna is okay, apparently. At least some devotees believe so. So I'd love to hear your view as to why is this so essential? Why did you work so hard to produce it?
Right. Well, let's start with the definition of ethics. And I'm not looking to give you an academic definition of ethics. I think a definition that works for the greatest number of people is the golden rule. Treat me the way I would like to be treated. I will treat you the way I believe you would like to be treated. Let us all treat one another fairly. Let us treat one another with love and respect and compassion, which are, after all, the hallmarks of Vaishnava behavior. Why it is so important is very simple. Ethics are not a nice to do add-on to devotional life. They are at the very heart of devotional life. There may have been a time, going back to ancient history, when spiritual life meant going away from society, going away from the hustle and bustle of worldly life and the responsibilities that come with it. Those days are long gone. We are too interconnected as a human race for spiritual life to any longer take place in a vacuum. Your progress as a devotee, my progress as a devotee, is intimately connected to our behavior in the larger world. There's no such thing as yoga. There is no such thing as bhakti. There's no such thing as Krishna consciousness separate and apart from behavior. Unfortunately, maybe because the early years of Prabhupada's mission were in a kind of emergency mode. Remember, he didn't know how many years he had left. You know, he came here, he was already 70. He wasn't always in the best of health. And he had a lot to do. He had a lot that he had to accomplish without knowing how long he had to do it in. So it was a lot of emergency work, you know, getting the books published, getting them distributed, building temples, establishing Sankirtan programs, the festivals, prasadam distribution, deity worship. My gosh, how he managed to do as much as he did in 12 short years is already miraculous. If on top of all of that, he was not here long enough to also establish what I believe he meant by the varnashram system, meaning the culture of humanity, the behavior of people across different divides in such a way that optimizes the prospects for our mutual spiritual progress, well, that needs to be understood and taken into consideration. But he did not mean for things to stop there. He absolutely intended for his disciples and followers to take his mission forward and to fill in those missing pieces. So in a sense, I guess the code of ethical behavior, which frankly, I consider my part in that to be minor, but whatever part I have played, it's a way of thanking Prabhupada. It's a way of saying thank you for having established the fundamentals for reviving our souls. Now let's go forward and do better.
The risk always with constitutions, mission statements, codes of behavior is, you know, what happens if they're violated? What happens if they're contravened in some ways? Are they, you know, just a platitudinal statement, or is there actually a commitment? What's your view about what ISKCON needs to do to bring this to life? It's been ratified by the GBC. I note you've got a few comments there about its implementation. How's this meant to be utilized exactly?
Implementation is the key here. You're absolutely correct. Lawyers will tell you, judges will tell you that there are a lot of laws on the books that nobody knows about until a lawyer brings it into a courtroom and states it as the precedent for a legal argument. We want to do better than that. We don't want the code of ethical behavior to sit on the shelf. We want it to be perpetuated. We want its importance to be recognized, and we want its points to be implemented. How to do that is where we are right now, actually. Getting the GBC to vote the code into ISKCON law was just the beginning. The plans for implementation include tutorials and presentations that will be made available to temples, ISKCON projects, groups of leaders and communities internationally, so that the practical implementation of these points of ethical behavior can be made clear. My hope personally is that it will also become part of the prerequisites for serving in any official capacity, that there should be a course of ethical behavior where ISKCON officials and others, for that matter, all individuals seeking initiation should have a sense of what are the minimum standards expected in Prabhupada's society. What exactly did he mean when he said he wanted all of his followers to be gentlemen and gentlewomen? Practically, what did that mean? So that's the next step.
It's difficult perhaps sometimes to come up with a universal sense of right and wrong and what's ethical and so on. We note, for instance, around current controversies in the society that there are different cultural settings depending on which part of the world devotees come from. I note, for instance, that you've particularly talked about sexual misconduct. That actually got a lot of airtime in the code. How do we ensure that there is that sense of a universal ethos, a universal set of ethics?
You raise a critical issue here, and one that was extremely difficult for me, because I tend to be an idealist. You know, I'm an old hippie, and I come from a long line of New York Jewish intellectual lefty idealists. And so a course in realism was hard for me, but critically important. The fact is that we live in a very diverse, large world where it is unreasonable to expect a code, however firmly grounded in our Siddhanta. This is important to understand. No one will argue that sexual propriety, a certain standard of civilized behavior is central to our theology. What must also be recognized is that there are places in the world where, for example, certain kinds of behavior are illegal. You can be thrown in jail in certain countries for living your life in a way that is not approved by the culture. What do we do about that? You know, what do we do when a temple has been established in a territory where, let's go to a different topic, where performing Sankirtan in public is illegal? Do we follow the laws or do we break the laws? A lot of this is in a very experimental stage. This is very early on in the implementation of this code. The code does make certain recommendations. If there's some ambiguity, if there's some uncertainty about how to do something because you or your temple or your community may be in an environment that is not favorable to the kind of equitable behavior that we would like to see, the recommendation in the code is consult the wider community of Vaishnavas. Don't act on your own, because first of all, the wrong choice can lead to imprisonment or harm to your own community members, and it could have repercussions to Prabhupada's mission elsewhere in the world. So there are decisions that need to be made in concert with the larger ISKCON administration.
I work in the field of leadership development, and one of the most fundamental principles of effective leadership is trust. If a leader creates an environment of trust, so many things can get done that would be much harder in an environment where trust was compromised. In working for the late Stephen Covey, he used to compare trust to being like an immune system. If the immune system is strong, it can ward off any kind of infection. If the immune system is compromised, even the common cold could actually take a person out. I thought that was actually a very interesting thing. So looking at the succession since Srila Prabhupada bequeathed ISKCON to the GBC and so on, it does seem like there is a bit of a crisis of trust in leaders, and most of them revolve around ethics, accountability for funds, conflict of interest, potentially things like sexual impropriety and so on. What's your view around how the society can restore the collective trust in the leadership?
Well, one thing you need to know is that I'm a hopeless optimist when it comes to the future of Prabhupada's mission. I believe that what he did was nothing short of miraculous, and that the society he established has this extraordinary, let's call it an internal cleansing mechanism. No matter how aggressively we try to throw his mission off track, no matter how foolish we may behave in our own lives or toward others, in time, this internal mechanism will kick into gear and things will turn out the way he had wanted. That is how I choose to view Prabhupada's mission. And I believe strongly in that. In terms of restoring faith in the leadership, I believe was the phrase you used.
Yes.
I'd like to suggest that the faith in the leadership is there, it's strong, and it's quite widespread. There are individuals who feel otherwise, but I believe they are in the minority. I do not believe that the ISKCON community, taken as a whole, distrusts its leadership. I think we've seen in the past few years here in the United States that a very vocal minority can weaponize their own kind to a point that is dangerous to democracy. And I caution people who may be feeling estranged from ISKCON, which I can identify with. That was me for a very, very long time. That things may not be as severely off track as you think. Bear in mind that where we get our information is critically important, and generally people don't have a very comprehensive, informed view of what's going on within the ISKCON society worldwide. I think we tend to hear about the exceptions. We tend to hear about the problems. We tend to hear about where things have gone south, where they've gone wrong, where people have been hurt, damaged, where there's been abuse. We tend to hear those instances because they need to be heard. Those moments must be heard. It does not mean that those moments typify the health of the society overall. So I would caution about that in the first instance. I think the second thing to understand is that there has been a lot of progress made. I'm old enough. I turned 71 last June. Okay, it's not the end of the road, but I've been around a while. And I joined Prabhupada's movement in December of 1969. So what is that? It's over a half century. We'll put it that way. And I've seen a lot, and I've known a lot of people, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll put it that way. And my great fortune is knowing many of ISKCON's leaders. You know, there's some rotten apples in every barrel, but don't condemn the barrel. There's a lot of good out there, and there are a lot of very intelligent, thoughtful, compassionate, sensitive people working very hard to move Srila Prabhupada's mission forward, and I stand with them.
One of the areas that you mentioned in the code is responsible social media use, or the ethics of communications and so on. I wonder if you could say something about that.
Well, you know, the access to media that allows the individual to have a global voice is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's very empowering. It means that marginalized people, underrepresented people, minorities have a platform for getting their voice out there and letting the world know what their situation is like. A lot of some of the most important revolutions that have occurred over the course of the last couple of decades have been started and nurtured and launched online. That's new. That was not there when Srila Prabhupada started his movement. So that's the upside, is that there are a lot of good things that can be done with that kind of worldwide access. The downside is you can't control who's going to use that access or for what purposes. And it is the downside, if you will, of freedom of expression, that it must be extended to everyone, including people whose perspectives may be hurtful to others. This is a larger issue, but I think the bottom line answer to your question is, as Vaishnavas, we are compelled by our faith, by our culture, to act always with the utmost respect. And if you have a different disagreement, different opinion towards someone's position within the ISKCON administration, you have the right to say so. And if you're going to use social media to get that position across, God bless you, that's your prerogative. But do so as a Vaishnava. Do so as someone who has understood the centrality of respect and dignity and fairness and a level-headed voice in our action in the world.
Who do you see as being in scope for this ethical conduct? Is it, I think that you make a point that an ISKCON leader would be even more accountable or something to that effect. But obviously ISKCON is such a broad church these days. There are so many layers, there's so many different levels of commitment and involvement. How far do you see it extending?
Oh, I have, I put no limitations on the good that could be done by a code of ethical behavior. I look at where we can go. You know, I feel like we're a little bit like that civilian crew on the SpaceX rocket that went into space a week or two back. You know, we're on the cusp of something quite extraordinary. Imagine, if you would, what could be accomplished by a community of elevated Vaishnavas working in harmony to bring an informed, enlightened perspective to issues of poverty, environment, education, the rights of women, minorities, other underrepresented groups. Imagine what a community of dedicated and exemplary Vaishnavas could do to end armed conflict, to achieve détente, disarmament in areas of the world where governments fail, where military forces fail, where businesses fail, where NGOs and other standard channels have failed to achieve results. Healthcare, I mean, on and on and on. We have such a unique contribution to make to the world. If we walk our talk, if we are out there behaving in an ethically exemplary way, I don't think there's any limit to the kind of contribution we can make in the world. And conversely, if we do not live up to the ethical standards of our Vaishnava tradition, we have no right to be out there on the streets predicating Krishna consciousness and expecting that other people should follow us. No right whatsoever.
Let's bring the conversation to child protection. It received quite a bit of coverage in the report, in the code. Arguably in the West, there are probably very few travesties as grave. It may not have always been that way, but certainly in recent years. This is not necessarily the same everywhere. And obviously we've got some high profile cases that are going on at the moment where some people are saying this was a minor incident, spots on the moon, and others are going, this absolutely disqualifies somebody from ever being in a leadership role in the future. How do we adjust for these different attitudes?
Well, let me qualify my answer to you by saying, first of all, that it is an issue of utmost concern, as far as I can tell, within the ISKCON administration. There's been a child protection office in place for, I believe, 20 years or more. It's not perfect by any stretch. My impression is that they're understaffed and underfunded. I believe that there is a long, long way to go. And it's too early on. This code of ethical behavior was ratified on August 21st.
Yeah.
It's less than 2 months ago. So I think all of the various pieces and how they fit together are still being explored right now. So I can't offer you an informed answer to something that's still a work in progress. That I can't anticipate what that will look like. What I can do is agree with you and say that this is of the utmost importance. I believe it was at the heart of my separation from the ISKCON institution. And I do not believe that there will ever be a time when we will be paying too much attention to the issue of adequate child protection, redress of grievances. It is arguably the greatest single black mark on Prabhupada's mission.
Yeah.
And for me, it was, as I say, a big reason for wanting to see such a code created.
Thank you. Well, we deeply appreciate, on behalf of the general devotees, we deeply appreciate that you've done this. I might invite you to make some concluding comments. So far, we haven't got any questions or comments. But in me saying this now, I might prompt a few. We seem to only have a handful of people watching live. Obviously, I'll tag you in the thread so that you might find subsequent conversation you get to be a part of. But what thoughts would you leave us with in terms of, what any of us can do with ethics and moving forward the ethical agenda?
Well, people like Prabhupada stories, and wherever I go, I'm usually asked to tell some. Maybe I can do that here rather than pontificating or trying to leave you with some kind of bombastic closing words. I can tell you that when I met Srila Prabhupada, I was 19 years old. And it was the first time we met was in Paris. And he was very kind to me. He was very generous to me. Over the course of the many years that I got to travel with him and serve him in different capacities, I took brazen advantage of it, asked him anything and everything that was on my mind. And he never bridled at it. He always took it very seriously and always honored me with a considered reply. And when I remember him, I remember someone who lived at the very height of ethical norms. I think of someone, there are people who would focus on a sentence here or a statement there in Prabhupada's long career of millions of sentences and millions of statements as a way of justifying some kind of prejudicial behavior. I can tell you that that is probably the most heinous offense that I can think of to Prabhupada's memory, is to look at one moment and claim that that was his policy for everyone, everywhere, under all times and circumstances. What a horrible thing to do. Here was someone who gave his life, for heaven's sakes, 2 heart attacks on board the boat just coming over here, to turn us into ethical people, to turn us from the degenerates we were into exemplary human beings. And he did that with the utmost of patience, the utmost of care and understanding that we did not have the benefit of a Vedic upbringing, even those of us who came from good families. You know, a good family in the West still eats meat, drinks liquor, and whatever, you know. So him coming here and extending to us the courtesy of his teachings, the courtesy of his example, is a blessing that we did not deserve. And I can tell you frankly, I'm alive today. I am sustained today by my memories of my spiritual master and the ethical way that he treated everyone. It brings tears to my eyes to remember how much respect, how much love and care he extended to everyone. And it didn't matter. They could have been a big celebrity. They could have been a prime minister. I mean, I saw him with such an amazing range of individuals, professors and Sanskritists and celebrities and heads of state and billionaires and, you know, you name it. I've seen him in front of all those people. He was the same toward all. And it didn't matter if his guest in his room that day was, I kid you not, someone who swept the streets. There were people who came to see him in Europe when I was with him there, who they were part of the municipal street cleaning forces. Same, absolutely the same degree of respect and dignity. And I didn't always understand the philosophy, and it's a very deep philosophy that here, but man, did I appreciate what he was doing as on a personal level. And I said, that's what I want. That's what I'm going to do. And I think it's a shame that it's taken this long for us to codify that behavior into a set of a code of ethical behavior. Better late than never.
I've got a few questions here. I'll just throw them up on the screen. If the Code of Ethics was passed into law 2 months ago, but it was based on existing GBC resolutions going back to the 70s, it seems that much of the content of the code has been around for a while. I don't know if you want to comment on how you composed the code.
Well, around for a while, you can go back 5,000 years to the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, you know, the Code of Ethics is embedded in Krishna's teachings to Arjuna. Read Bhagavad Gita. Read what Krishna says about those who are dearest to him. He says, those who bring no pain or anxiety to others, they are dear to me. Those who are clean, they are dear to me. Just read it. It's all there in Bhagavad Gita. It's all there in the Bhagavad Gita. What we're doing is simply, if you will, transposing these millennial teachings into a language that can be applied to the culture and the world around us. So yes, my thanks to the person for bringing that up. It's an important point. This is nothing new. This has been part of Vaishnav culture since the dawn of time.
Thank you. You emphasize being level-headed. Is it okay to get angry about child abuse when the perpetrator has been given preferential treatment?
Absolutely. Get irate, get het up, you know, get angry, get active. Sure. Whenever we see injustice being done, particularly, look, it is such a sad world out there. I mean, who are the people who always get hurt? It's the young, it's the old, it's the destitute, it's those who are least capable of defending their own interests. What a sad, sad world we live in. You know? The fact that we even need a code of ethical behavior at all says we live in a time when even basic courtesies, basic humanity has just been washed away. It's gone down the drain. We have to remind ourselves to be kind. What kind of a world is that? And yes, when it happens, absolutely we should speak up. Why? What possible reason? You are at fault if you don't speak up. You know, this word ahimsa used to mean do no harm, right? Well, a more informed contemporary reading of that term would be become involved in a non-aggressive way to see that harm is not done.
Mm.
If you want to be nonviolent, you have to be actively nonviolent, not passively nonviolent. It's our obligation, not only as devotees, but as human beings, to step forward, to be upstanders. Sometimes that word is used. My background is Holocaust studies. Sometimes it's said by survivors who are lecturing, particularly to junior high school or high school students, don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Mm. If you see bullying, if you see wrong being done, don't walk away. You have an obligation to step forward and say something. That's true for us too.
There's a few more comments coming. I might just interject one quick question. Do we sometimes philosophically reason our way into a lack of ethics? I'm just thinking about sort of the lie for Krishna. If we're selling a book and we do an underhand method of either raising the collection or selling a book that a person might not have otherwise taken, or even raising funds for opening the Vrindavan temple and so on, there seems to be times where devotees rationalize, if I'm doing it for Krishna, I don't want to get mundane morality to get in the way. Right. You know, Yudhishthir's wheels only touched the floor when he refused to lie.
Yeah, I get this one a lot. I would suggest that we need to make a certain distinction between the early days at ISKCON, which were a kind of naive, sometimes dangerously so, period earlier in our growth, in our history, when that kind of a mentality was prevalent. Oh, it's for Krishna, so it doesn't matter. And sometimes in an emergency mode, there are liberties that need to be taken. You know, when the United States was attacked on 9/11, in the aftermath of 9/11, there were certain constitutional rights that were put into abeyance, into suspension, because it was necessary to take certain emergency measures to make sure that the country was safe. And most of the nation was in favor of that. When we're under attack, we're okay with certain normal safeguards, privileges, laws being compromised because we want to be safe. But those are the exceptions. That's not now. That's not where we are now as a society. This is not 1966 or 1967. You know, the time has come for us to grow up. You know, do you really think that if you finagle someone into taking a book and then afterwards they feel angry that they've been taken advantage of, that you've actually helped them progress spiritually? Do you honestly believe that? Oh, if they just touch the book, yeah, you're touched in your head. If you actually believe that by cheating, you're moving Prabhupada's mission forward, I don't understand the thinking there, except that, again, a half century ago, maybe that was allowed to happen because we were stupid and we didn't know better. That's over. That period of history is gone. That's over now. Let's get real. Let's wake up. Let's grow up, and let's move on. The time has come to recognize that if we are going to realize the mission that Prabhupada left to us, it is going to be by becoming exemplary members of the Vaishnava community. I know from my own experience, he told me one time, he said, stand on purity. The world has never seen the kind of purity that we are presenting. And you don't need anything else. You don't need sophisticated marketing. You don't need any kind of duplicity. He said, stand on our purity. Everything will be achieved from that.
Thank you. There's a couple of other questions here. This is a double-barreled one. Can you tell us more about the process you went through to get this ratified by the GBC? Was it easy, difficult? What were some of the hurdles, successes, setbacks before you finally succeeded?
Well, I'm tempted to make a joke about it and say, if you have enough money for bribes, you can get anything. But I won't do that because it's a serious subject. This was a learning experience for me. I mean, I've already confessed to you and your viewers, that I'm the kind of liberal whom the conservative element rightly needs to keep in check. I've learned in my old age to be very respectful and appreciative of the conservative elements in ISKCON, because they are the ones whose responsibility is to protect best practices, to make sure that the tradition is honored and that things don't go too far off course. And the job of lefties like me is to challenge them in that. Because if you look at the history of religious communities, the innovations rarely were made by the clergy. They're made by the congregants, by the laity. The conservatives are the ones, their job is, they're like Switzers at the gate of the Vatican. They've got to protect the tradition. You can't turn to them for innovation. That has to come from some other quarter. That's where the congregants, that's where the devotee communities come in. We have that prerogative. We can do that. So it was a learning curve for me coming from that side of the aisle, if you will, that there are challenges that the GBC contends with all the time. And I had to be respectful of that. For example, we talked a little while ago about different laws in different parts of the world and how we have to sometimes reconcile our ideals with the practicalities of the civic environment in some part of the world. My late mother was a great big fan of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the things that my mom and I did just a few weeks before she passed away was to watch a recently produced documentary about RBG, as she is affectionately known. One of the things that I've learned from the late Chief Justice Ginsburg is to not work for big, broad change. Work for small change. Work for incremental change. And then build on it, grow from there. That was the guiding principle here.
Yeah, thank you. Just with respect to, different attitudes in different parts of the world, how sensitive should we be to the mores of the wider society? Evidently, we're here to change them as opposed to compromise. And Prabhupada, yes, always spoke heavily about that. But, do we take their sensitivities into account, or are we just indifferent and doing our own otherworldly thing?
Yep. No, you're asking the right question. You've really gone to the heart of it. You're a good interviewer. I appreciate the way you're conducting this. The other thing that I learned from Ruth Bader Ginsburg was to not act in such a way, to not act out of anger, or to act in such a way that you incur enemies. Our biggest weapon, our most effective weapon, is paradukkha. The biggest arm that we have, the biggest tool we have for making inroads in even the most difficult, the most disgusting of environments in the world today, is love for all living creatures. It is the radical compassion. It is so hard. It is so difficult. And yet we are compelled by our faith to practice it. And I do not believe that some kind of greater, faster, more effective headway will be made by insisting on anything. I don't believe so. I've tried that. I've tried it and it didn't work. I'll tell you something. I've tried that in my marriage also and it didn't work. These principles of, ethical behavior, they're not just for, world preachers going out there, trying to reform society. They work in personal relationships as well. And that's my hope. My hope is that this code will demonstrate its importance on very personal levels, as well as on the broader levels of social action.
Just on that Paradukha Dukhi, I mean, one of the areas of cultural tension maybe in our society are the more orthodox proponents of Varnashram, and in particular gender roles within Varnashram, that women should be in the home and looking after husbands and not really have much of an identity beyond that, versus those who feel, no, Srila Prabhupada invited his female disciples to take a much more active role in the propagation of the society and so on. Is there an ethos just in terms of affording everybody that opportunity to contribute versus really pushing these old codes, Dharma Shastras, Manusmriti, and so on?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I don't know anybody who reads the Dharma Shastras, it's okay to invoke these things as some kind of, ideal from the past. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, live with times that are with thee. I think every generation is called upon to adjust the tradition for its day and time and circumstances. So we need to, I think, take that into consideration. Here's my my observation. Let me bring this down to a very personal level. Having been in ISKCON as long as I have, and having known as many people within Prabhupada's movement as I have, and I'm talking about going back to some of the very first disciples in the early days, from San Francisco or from London and so on, and working closely today with many of ISKCON's leaders. My impression is that, for the most part, I'm sure there are always some exceptions, for the most part, these are very, very sincere people. If we find a reluctance on the part of some of them to be more ecumenical in their embrace of everyone on that same level, and not dividing the world into women and men or people of different categories. First of all, I think it's because we frail human creatures were formed early in life, and biases generally have their origin in early life experiences. I truly believe that people who fail to recognize the importance of that Pandita Samadarshanaha vision of all beings do so not because of some philosophical differences or their own particular take on the Dharma Shastra, but because something early in life sensitized them to be fearful of gender differences and so on. And they've dragged that into their Krishna conscious life. That's one reason I see it. The other reason I see that kind of resistance is that people, they just do not want to be remembered as the one who broke the parampara, the one who introduced that system and that brought everything to a standstill. That just, from there it was downhill. You let that little change in, and it's the Trojan horse, that will unleash these, destructive powers of radical socialism, or who knows what, their minds tell them. And they legitimately don't want to be that person who does that. They might even in their heart of hearts want to see the change, that will bring that embrace of all people, whatever their particular background or perspective or persuasions or whatever it may be. But they just don't want to be the ones to do it because they're afraid of derailing the mission. So in a sense, it's out of their love for Prabhupada. I try to keep that in mind. I try not to be as angry as I often get toward people who just act in ways that I think are stupid. So as you can tell, I struggle with this myself. I don't want to hate them. I don't want to yell at them and put them down. I want to understand them. I want to be, here we go, the change I wish to see in the world, And that means being compassionate even towards people whom I vehemently object to. That's really hard. It's hard. Mm-hmm. So why does it happen? Well, for the reasons I've mentioned, I think. Does that mean we shouldn't try? Of course not. We have to work hard, diligently, persistently to bring things up to a better standard. That's our job now.
Prabhuji, we've promised you that we'll let you back to your regular life. Thank you so much for being so abundant with your time and your thoughts and giving us a lot to think about. Thank you for ushering in this ethical code, and we look forward to subsequent levels of its implementation and the benefits for the society and so on. I will tag you in the thread in case there are other comments that you might wish to participate in. But a big thank you on behalf of all the viewers for attending today. I might just end the live broadcast now. We can debrief for a moment or two. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.